Us here for this Ethereum Magicians community-led session. I think that we have a lot of people in this room who care about execution on Ethereum, and I don't want this to be a panel of us disseminating information to you. The idea is more to have an open discussion with the community, but I have many prompts, and I know that there are some people who have a lot of context on the questions that we're going to contemplate, and so maybe it will make sense to think of this as a bit of a fishbowl where we get the opportunity to talk about the things, especially some things that we may not get to talk about in our day-to-day jobs, and you can have the opportunity to listen a bit and maybe take away some things. But if you have something to say or ask, feel free to come up, take a seat up here, and feel free to ask us a question. With that said, we've got a couple of people up here on the panel. I don't know if you guys want to just go ahead and introduce yourselves really fast across.
Hey, I'm Alexei from Reth.
I'm Dan O'Farron. I'm working on EOF right now.
I guess I didn't say that I'm also lightclient working on Go Ethereum.
And I'm Guillaume, working on Go Ethereum and also heading stateless consensus. We work on everything stateless.
So we've got a few people up here who are very involved with the execution layer of Ethereum, and I wanted to sort of start off this conversation by just asking each of you what the end game for execution in Ethereum looks like. I think especially on the execution layer, we think a lot about what the next fork is going to look like, what the next 1 or 2 years are going to look like, how we can make incremental changes to the execution layer. I wanted to give this as like more of a thought exercise. What could the world look like? Obviously, it's very difficult to change the execution layer because so many people depend on the interface being stable. But if you could say what you think the end game might look like in an execution world, what might you come up with?
Lower block time, 1 second, or some streaming approach where you send transactions and don't wait for the block to form. Higher throughput where you have higher gas limits, or for example, you have more optimized EVM and you can pack more execution into one block, into one transaction. It was about performance, I think, about the nodes itself, the stateless or some kind of a light node that allows you to not run the node with the whole state, because we think about 10, 20 years, and state will be enormous, even if we drop the history. So we need to think about how to have a validating node, or if you are not like inferior alchemy, how to run a node at home without 4 terabyte disk. For me, I think these are the most important questions, and there's a whole lot of like things that L2s can do with experimentation on the EVM, on the networking layer. I think for L1, this is my top of mind.
So for me, when I think of the future of the execution environment, I tend to take a perspective not from the perspective of who's running the node, but who's using the environment that they're executing in. Much like computer programs are in typical operating systems today. They operate in different user spaces, they operate in different layers, and some of those have different rules, but at a certain critical level, they all use the same language, the same operation codes to describe what they're doing. So like, when you go into the kernel in ring 0, there's things you can do and things you can't do. And when you go into user space, you have a whole lot more freedom to use things like absurd amount of memory and spend a lot of time executing things. But when you're doing a video driver, you have to do things quickly. So for the future of the execution environment, I see standardization and probably a little bit of specialization depending upon which ring of the chain you're running on. If you're settling thousands of transactions, you're going to be in and out as quick as possible. And if you're 3D rendering your PFP from your NFT, you're going to have a lot more freedom. But it's going to compile mostly to the same executable format and be portable. And if you have enough money, you could render your PFP in ring 1. I wouldn't recommend it, but you could.
So I guess my answer to the question is slightly less developer or user centric as maybe seems like you guys you want the developer experience to be good. You want running a node to be good. And I guess for me, I want running a node to be good also, and I want these things. But when I think like what the end game for execution is, I thought there was this nice interview from Vitalik a few years ago talking about what he thought the end world should look like in Ethereum and the way that people should consume the chain. And how he described it was that he envisions that every 12 seconds you'll receive a small proof over the internet and verify that proof and move the head of the chain forward locally 1 block. And to me, that to me is what feels like the right end game is. We have simplified the process of trustlessly creating a trustless connection with the chain. It gives us the root where we can now prove anything that we need to prove about it. Of course, there's many questions down the path, like how can we get those proofs? What will those proofs look like? Will they be efficient? But the core of the thing is that on basically any type of device, you can efficiently verify that you are at the head of the chain. And this even goes beyond light clients. Today, it's sort of possible to do this by verifying the light client sync committee over time, but it only gives you an honest majority assumption. And what we want in blockchains typically is that we want people to fully validate the chain. And as long as to fully validate the chain, you need 1 terabyte, 2 terabytes of history or storage, or you need to execute tens of millions or 100 millions of gas, it's always going to be something that is better left for more professional hardware, not something that you can do on the fly on your phones. So to me, it feels like moving towards that direction for the end game. I would love to see more ZK EVM work, more ZK VMs. That's something that I think is where we want to go, and the path to that point to me is not so clear. It feels like it's a bit away. I don't know if you have things to say on ZK EVM or ZK VMs or stateless, but I am very curious about how we can go from where we are today, thinking about kind of incremental forks, to making a huge leap to something like a ZK VM and stateless.
Yeah, there's a lot of unpack there, but maybe maybe let me give my own answer before I plug into this. What I'd like to have in Ethereum is, the promise has always been the word computer, and I just want that. And currently we have a lot of siloing between L2s. What I want is, for execution, I want to be able to call something from a contract on an L2 to go into a different L2 or L1, come back. It doesn't have to be immediate. You were talking about ring 0, ring 1, ring 2. Those, crossing those boundaries is extremely costly, even on a normal computer. But we should at least integrate the experience. Like, a user doesn't know, oh, I did a system call to switch ring 0. I want the same thing. I would like to have actually a diverse execution environment. So going back to your question, but I'd love to have RISC-V. I'd love to keep the EVM because the EVM is great. WASM, I've seen some former WASM colleagues in the audience. Maybe not, but RISC-V, EVM. I'm gonna shock Dano, but yes, EVM with EOF. That would be great. And when it comes to ZKVM, sorry, what was your question again? The ZKVM?
I was just curious if you have any thoughts on what needs to happen on L1, in the next 5 to 10 years,
right,
to bring us either to having core consensus clients verifying proofs of EVM execution, or what types of things need to be done to move us along that path.
Right.
Does anything even need to be done? Because there's also a thought that maybe in the future the proving technology will be so efficient that nothing actually needs to change.
It will be, probably.
It will be probably.
No, yeah, probably, yeah. The question is, how long are you willing to wait, and how much risk are you willing to take? It's always the same problem. So if you have some claims, I'm a bit skeptic of them, but for example, SP1 say they can create a proof for a block for at 20 cents, 20 cents per block. In my view, it's not fast enough, but we could get there, right? We could imagine changing, if we found the the tree structure that allows everybody to build their own ZK proof in no time, then execution is, you can do upgrades, you can add RIS5, you can add even WASM. It doesn't matter because everybody will be able to prove everything on their machine and send around proofs that are small enough so everybody can receive those proofs in a very short time frame. Could be across shards, could be rollups. Sorry, but I have the vision that rollups are going to be enshrined into shards at some point, at least some of them. So it's like a trial period for becoming a shard. So yeah, what needs to happen? I mean, a lot more research, a lot more discoveries. We also need the pace of ZK improvement to stop because they keep churning new ideas. But once we have something, that is good enough and that is also not guaranteed to be replaced by something in the next 5 months, I think we should start coding. But I think that future you describe is not too far off.
I want to dig into the native sharding aspect, but I also want to mention quickly, a lot of people are walking in. This is a community-led session. If you have something to contribute, if you have a question to ask, please feel free and take a seat. We'll try and pass over the mic to you. Yep. Would love to just hear more from what you guys have in your head.
And we'll add more seats if needed.
We lose what you guys are saying.
Okay. Yeah. Does anybody want to lock the doors?
It's only a fire hazard.
Yeah, if it's possible to increase the volume, that would be great.
I want to riff on real quick.
Yeah, I would like to get your guys' response to.
So I have a suggestion regarding the door. Maybe we can have slots. So every 5 minutes, people are allowed to enter or leave, and in between, the door is kind of locked. That would be nice.
5-minute slots. Can we get down to 1 minute slot? Just kidding. So I want to riff really quick on what I would add in the next 5 to 10 years on top of ZK. I do think we need a bit of ZK because let's take the scenario. You got someone working at a coffee shop. They just got paid. And so they need the global state compressed. They don't need to care that their coffee shop just executed a gigantic financial debt trade to make sure that they could pay their workers. They just need to know that they had enough money to pay them. And they don't need to know how it interacts with the rest of the market to get everything working. They just need a ZK proof to say that the money that they have is valid. But on the other hand, I think it's something that I would add in the next 5 years is ways to increase isolation of transactions. So you have this big, giant ZK of every transaction on the chain. And we need to have, whether it's through opcodes or whether it's through witnesses like Verkle, ways to take out just your transaction. I just care that I got paid for my coffee shop and that I can prove that on my smartwatch. And I can run through the entire execution locally without having to run the entire execution of all of Uniswap for the entire block. So my vision for the next 5 years is ZKing it to make sure that we only care about what you care about and isolating and executing that one part that you care about and having everything that you can need proven into that route that advances every 12 seconds.
Sorry, if I may add. Okay, when I said it's pretty close to happening, 5 years might be a bit optimistic, but yeah, if it can happen, that would be great.
Okay,
Cool.
I really want to dig into this. We're kind of talking about native shards. We're talking about isolation of execution. But I wanted to quickly ask before we end that subject is, does anyone feel that ZK EVM does not make sense on L1 in some point in the medium-term future? In 10 years, is something going to happen where we say maybe we should never ZK the L1? Is that something that people generally feel is going to be in the end game?
No.
Before going into the answers, I wanted to introduce another teammate from Red.
Hello everyone, I'm Dragan Akita. I'm part of Red, mostly doing work on RVM now. Glad to be here.
Yeah, welcome. Going back to the thing. I think, okay, my view at least, it makes no sense not to ZK the VM because what we want is also, I mean, ZK might be the wrong term, but we want privacy. This is one thing that's really missing in the blockchain space. We have Zcash, but actually I haven't checked. Maybe someone knows more about Zcash than I do. They're not really popular. I haven't seen on CoinMarketCap for quite a while, actually. Okay, it doesn't matter. The price is one thing, but that doesn't make everything. We need to have something that's going to step up to replace Zcash. And or maybe have Zcash as an L2, why not? But yeah, privacy is going to be a big topic in my view in the coming years, and we cannot not do anything ZK related. Like we're gonna want to push more ZK, and as a result, the ZK VM is basically the thing you need to, like the step you need.
Yeah, I guess I was hoping to separate that from doing it on the L1. Like, do you feel that, yes, privacy is important, yes, distinctly verifying execution is important, but do you think that it's something that we'll get to a place where it is going to be on the critical path for the L1, or do you think that it's something that may be relegated only to layer 2s?
Yeah, no, I mean, if it's going to be on layer 2s, okay. Once again, I believe that shards are going to, rollups are basically shards on the trial period. So we're going to need this. That's, again, I don't know what the future is made of, but otherwise you would have such a disconnect between L2 and L1, and the L1 being the least private chain in the entire space, that it doesn't make sense to, in my view.
I feel that it depends on technology. In 5 years, ZK and basically that industry is moving forward very fast. In 5 years, it should be, we'll see. It depends on how fast it will be. If I can prove full block in consumer grade laptop or something like that, then in 5 years, the question was, why didn't Ethereum include the ZK EVM? So I think it depends on technology. In 5 years, it's very hard to say now if the ZK EVM is going to be good fit for Ethereum in 5 years.
I just want to add just a point. Everybody says ZK, but what we're currently looking at is like
True.
Starks or Snarks. What we're seeking right now is to get the S, which is for sickness. I hope that was correctly pronounced. We want to be able to not redo the entire execution. ZK is zero knowledge. This is where we add the privacy layer. This is way further off than just the Stark. But yeah, okay. We also have Jared. We were joined by Jared, so.
Cool, thanks. Hey all, I also work on the Geth team. I guess I would just be curious if the EVM currently lends itself to being able to be efficiently metered from the perspective of a prover seeing a transaction or a block to know that certain code knowing the cost of proving certain code. I mean, like for example, we have various precompiles that, depending on the ZK protocol, may be expressed strangely in the prover, which such that the cost to prove does not correspond to the gas they consume on the chain. So like for example, I work on a proposal called EVM Max, which is a proposal to bring more efficient modular arithmetic to the base layer. And I feel like in this case, like if we can express precompiles more efficiently on the base layer so that you can see from the prover perspective what is actually being done instead of just an opaque precompile, that would lend itself well to ZK VM.
So that was a large part of the motivation for moving gas introspection from EOF. It allows us to do dramatic changes to the gas schedule without breaking code that depends on particular values in the gas schedule. Because back before Constantinople, we had some design patterns that depended upon specific amounts of gas being available to execute reverts. And when the price went up, those contracts broke in horribly unexpected ways. And they were broken until we added the access lists much later. So getting rid of gas introspection prevents people from engaging in those patterns that make dramatically changing the gas schedule. And if we can change the gas schedule, we can do fancier things like have multivariable gas schedule to where the storage could cost different from the execution. And then things like having the Kachak opcode be completely unrelated to the price of the other opcodes. And depending upon whether you're executing in a snark context or whether you're executing in a computer context, it could be priced wildly differently. So yeah, gas metering is important, but I think also variability in the gas metering is just as important, because gas metering is how we solve the halting problem.
Well, actually, maybe I misunderstood what you said, but do we need, like, in the fully starkified or snarkified future, do we even need gas metering? Because, we just have.
You
We-
need gas metering if you're going to force someone to create the proof for you. If you create the proof, it doesn't really matter how much execution you do
Yeah.
because you have created the proof, so it
Right.
can be succinctly verified.
Right.
But if you just send a transaction to a bundler and you kind of expect that they're going to bundle it, then
Yeah.
you need to kind of pay commensurate
Right.
to the
Paying
proving
is a
cost.
different thing, but like the metering itself, you could just say pay a fixed price, and if you go
But
beyond
don't you
your
need to zero knowledge prove that, or succinctly prove that the amount of gas
Oh.
spent was
Okay,
charged
yeah,
from the account?
this was a tangent. Maybe we should discuss it. My view was that precisely, if you get the proof in due time, then you did not go overboard. But okay, that was just a tangent. Let's move on. Yeah.
Good introduction to split between the builders and verifiers.
Sorry.
A good introduction to the split between the builders and verifiers.
Right.
I think in the future we'll see the split between those two. If everything is like snarkified, it will be more obvious. But even now we are seeing like builders being separate entities with map boost, everything. They are building the block in performant way. They want to extract value. There is different back of discussion about that. But I think in the future we'll see that split even more. I think that it even needs to be included in like core protocols and in some way or form. I'm not sure. I'm not that familiar. What exactly would that be? Yeah.
Okay, I think that we mostly agree. We would love succinct verification. We would love privacy on L1. These are things that, from scratch, we would try to build a system focused on that. Of course, the technology is advancing rapidly. We have to see what things look like in 5 or 10 years. I do want to jump back to a point that was made both by you and Dano about isolated execution, native sharding. Maybe you could try and pitch the community native sharding and why it's important in the end game.
I mean, yeah, I don't really. Okay, let's say there was always this plan, right? A lot of other blockchains are doing sharding. We took a different route, which is fine. We don't have to do native sharding. I mean, I'm not going to die on that hill. But I think the biggest problem with rollups is that they can disappear. So I think at some point, like as long as they're backed by only one company, those companies could go bankrupt. I mean, everybody remembers FTX. So yes, everybody could exit. That's the point of the rollup. Anybody can exit at any time, but then you lose some execution capacity. It's like losing a thread on a hardware thread on your processor. So I'm trying to finish because Dano has something to say, but. I think the reason why we kind of want to make this, like we want to have this, to create this space for people to experiment, but at the same time, as more and more infrastructure starts relying on those things, we should make them somewhat official. So that the community takes over. It's like people like companies open sourcing their software. After a while, some software becomes so infrastructure critical that it needs to be open source so that the community as a whole maintains it. And I think it's the same for rollup/shards.
Yeah, so the concern about rollups going away is real when they lock it in with their keys, but when they take the keys away, in theory, a single honest validator without permission could advance it. We're not there yet. And a funny story that came to mind, Fuel VM version 1 was one of the original optimistic rollups, and someone tried to publish a false proof of the block to test the system, and they thought no one was using it, was dead. And they got proven wrong pretty darn quick. So just because it looks dead doesn't mean that nobody's there trying to gain the fraud proofs from people trying to do bad things. But as long as these chains are held by required private keys, it's a huge risk.
Right. So I guess if we're thinking about what is the end game for execution in Ethereum, to me, native sharding doesn't feel on that critical path, because what we're talking about feels to me much more shorter, medium-term issues with the infrastructure and the expectation of things being around for a long time. I don't see an innate reason that we must have shards that are native to the protocol. And I think there's actually a lot of good reasons to not do this, especially if the endgame is, more zero knowledge proof based things. You don't have the types of issues where you have to have a live operator watching the chain all the time, making sure that the transitions are correct.
I mean, even in sorry, you want?
I feel that we should leave that part to the rollups to do their own things. Maybe there's future where we can help with that, like to embed something inside L1 to help like some standards, something like that. But that's mostly like, let's help them to do their own things. But if there is, I don't want to force anybody to do it in some way or some form. I think the current system where everybody can do it their own thing is precious, because the next thing is going to be better, and the next thing after that is going to be even better. So evolution improvements will happen on its own.
I would agree and add that if we agree that rollups can evolve at the rate of Ethereum, then it's fine. But I think rollups can go faster, and they want to go faster. And that's what we want to have, rollups innovating not at the same speed, having different security trade-offs than L1. And you have more secure rollups, you have less secure for games or whatever, and it should be fine. I agree that maybe some form of a rollup or something can be enshrined, for example, for private payments, when you have a very simple use case, or maybe it can be done on the L1 itself in some way. But there is a huge kind of forums like with the privacy on L1 and the legality of this and how it should be done properly.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like I disagree with what you're saying, but you said something pretty telling for me. It's like should be good enough, and like it should be okay. Sorry, I think you said. What I'm worried about was this whole rollup becoming part like enshrined somehow, is that I'm more worried about the worst case. I'm hugely paranoid. I'm always thinking about how things can go wrong. I mean, I think it's my job actually. So, like, I want 1 second block time. I want everything to be peachy. But the fact is, life is not always perfect, and I'm really worried about how things degrade when they don't work. And that's why, I want something. When something becomes critical enough, I would like the community to take it over more than just trusting that everything is going to be fine. But apart from that, I completely agree.
I agree. I don't argue with this. I think that would be nice to have, how it's called, like security hedge or whatever, to withdraw your funds, to force a state transition on the rollup. But if we say that, okay, optimism or like Arbitrum is too important and we cannot like let it fail, and we want to enshrine it, then we need to adopt Ethereum L1 for this. And I don't think we can do that. And if you think about users, and we should, obviously, I don't think that a lot of users will agree to make the execution of transactions worse, to make the UX worse for higher security assumptions. That's unfortunately not something that majority of people worry. And I think we should work from this somehow, that people today use Optimism, Arbitrum, whatever rollups, because they unfortunately care less about having censorship resistance or whatever decentralization that we have.
I mean, ultimately, this is a philosophical debate. Like, yes, users, I'm aware, I mean, we're all aware. Most people who interact like with smart contracts are mostly are hoping to get rich. That's, I mean, we all do, I guess. But we have a philosophical responsibility, I think, to also say, well, okay, the experience is not as good as your bank, although in many respects the Ethereum experience is already way better than any bank I've been interacting with. But it's one thing, but we also want to give you guarantees, and I think that's part of the product. And yes, some people it's not going to be good enough for some people, and they're going to go away, and it's a pain, but or it's at least it's sad. But those people just need to use banks. That's it. Yeah, I'm sorry for them, but yeah.
I disagree. I think we should do better than banks and better than Web2, and do not compromise at the same time on the values that we have,
Okay.
and deliver this like privacy, decentralization, whatever, in like a Trojan horse with a better UX, and people will use it for some reasons like no geo restrictions or better UX or lower price or better performance. And get at the same time privacy and decentralization, without actually knowing this. Because, as I said, I think most people do not care that much unless they live in some areas in the world.
Right, that's the thing. Like, people don't care until trouble hits. But okay, no, I agree. We need good UX. No question about this. We need better UX. No question.
Yep.
So it sounds to me like what we're talking about is we want to make sure that the platform or the product that Ethereum is providing is going to be around for a long time, is going to be correct, is going to provide UX. And so the way that we sort of pivoted to doing this is the Rollup-centric roadmap. And I'm curious to hear from people up here and anyone who's sitting on the seats. I think some more people have come in. Feel free to come up here and grab a mic if you have something to ask or something to say.
I mean, we know each other, so, we'd like to see someone we don't know.
I was just going to say there's questions behind, so.
Well, yeah, we'll get there eventually, okay. I think. But I wanted to ask, at what point would you say, or what would you need to see as a contributor to Ethereum or a community member to say this Rollup-centric roadmap did not work? And maybe we should rethink what the future of execution in Ethereum is.
Yeah, for me, I think today Ethereum L1 is not just for rollups. I think we were thinking that L1 is just for settling, and some people say that we should not improve EVM, for example, because it's good enough for the rollups, and we should focus on the blobs, for example, or pure DAS. I would argue that we want to have good experience for DeFi on L1 as well, and we want to keep this value that protocols have on L1, and we want to provide the security guarantees that we have. So it's not fully rollup-centric, and we still think about the UX and the speed of inclusion and the censorship resistance, and especially the things like slot time or block time when we make the experience in DeFi better for users. So I would look at this from the perspective of L1 for rollups and high-value DeFi, and work from this.
Yeah, definitely. I'd also say that making L1 and the EVM on L1 more expressive directly benefits rollups in the sense that those changes trickle downstream. So anything we can do to make the EVM more expressive, for example, to implement more efficient cryptographic primitives on the L1 EVM, that will naturally lend itself to making rollups better. So, yeah.
I guess maybe to reframe the question a little bit, if we could go down a thought experiment. Imagine that you're in a more traditional company. There's kind of a hierarchy. You're managing a bunch of engineering teams, and you're sort of tasked to do this research project, try this thing, and you're asked by the people who you report to say, what are the metrics that you need to see in 3 years to know that this project was successful? And I'm curious, like, what types of things would you want to see rollups to be doing in 3 or 5 years to say, this is the right path? Is there anything that they could be doing to say that this is the wrong path? Because I think that we could probably all agree that if 5 years, the amount of users in Ethereum is like much less than the amount of users that we have today, that something is wrong. And maybe the rollup-centric roadmap is still right, but we have to be able to analyze the actual situation and not be stuck on an ivory tower of theory and think about like the practicality of how do we bring the technology that we're trying to bring to the people that need it.
I think one metric I would look to, I don't know if it would be a good metric or a bad metric, but it would give information, is how many rollups leave the ecosystem. One way to view that may be that they've gained escape velocity and they can exist on their own. And another one may be that they're leaving because they can't get what they need for support from the central L1 rollup. But that is one metric I'd look up to get measurement on how it's working. And another thing I would get measurement on is how the rollups are differentiating themselves, if they're differentiating themselves, and what that impact has on the ecosystem as a whole. Is this going to be the case of giving away the milk instead of making people buy the cow? That's some of the things that I would look at to make sure that we're not just creating a new set of problems. And the thing is that, like, trying to judge the success or failure of rollups is kind of difficult, because whether or not Vitalik posted that post about a rollup-centric roadmap, these companies and these teams would have been doing rollups. They didn't need L1's blessings. They don't need L1's blessings. And the real question, I think, is what the relationship is between the L1 teams and the L2 teams, and what we expect from each other, and what we're going to provide for each other.
Yeah, that's well said. Any
Like,
others?
I guess I would say, like, to tack onto that, a simple metric in my mind of evaluating success overall is, I mean, can we find a use case that isn't just financial, right? I mean, so I think the Eve Online MMO, they're pivoting, they're doing a new project on optimism. So this is like something new that's coming out. I'm not like shilling that or anything. I'm not with optimism, but
Is Eve a game or a financial simulation? Anyway.
it's somebody once described it to me, I think, as like a spreadsheet simulator. I know there's a lot of spreadsheets involved, but anyways, I digress. Yeah, just like a use case on a rollup that is not a gimmick and that is not financial, that is not just financial, right?
So when we look at these root use cases, we also need to look at the amount of usage you're going to put on the chain. Like, I think property ownership and like NFTs for phygital things, I think could have huge value. But like, real estate doesn't change hands 5 times a second like some of these financially traded assets are. So we can't just judge the use cases by how many transactions they land, because a lot of these use cases will literally use as many transactions as you can create for them as a competitive advantage.
They don't change hands every 5 seconds yet.
Yet.
Eric?
Yeah. So I guess to bring the discussion back to native or enshrined rollups, whatever we want to call them, I'm curious, are there lessons we can learn from other ecosystems that have gone down this path? And the only one I'm aware of is Tezos. They're obviously very different, but I'm just curious from a technical standpoint, from I guess a bit of a social standpoint too, just because I mean, it is implicitly competitive with some of the rollup teams out there. I'm just curious if you guys or anyone in the room has explored that. I haven't looked at Tezos in a very long time, but it just came to mind.
The one I've seen us compared to is Cosmos and Atom 2.0, and I'm not enfranchised enough in that community to even know what they're talking about, so I would love someone to fill in the blanks.
Same.
I feel like in Cosmos it's not quite the same idea, and feel free for anyone in that ecosystem to come up and share. But to me, my understanding is that there is kind of some APIs for communicating amongst chains, but it's not an opcode that says deploy a new rollup to this slot, and the rollup has to look in a certain way. And maybe that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about native or enshrined. But to me, most of my experience comes from thinking about the world for phase 2 of Ethereum. Back in the days when we talked about Ethereum 2.0, phase 0, phase 1, phase 2, thinking a lot about native execution for Ethereum and having these like 1024 enshrined Ethereum 1 execution environments. And in those cases, like, we called this kind of like homogeneous sharding, having the same sort of execution environment spread across many different shards. And I think that in general, taking these types of approaches creates a very, very difficult coordination problem that has been kind of nicely solved via the rollup-centric roadmap. You sort of let the market go and decide how to build the best rollups. You give them the opportunity to do things where they have different security models, because not everything necessarily needs to be private, or not everything necessarily needs to have like the most robust amount of security. And maybe it's possible to do heterogeneous sharding on the L1, but I think that developing a platform like that is quite a ways away. And at that point, I have to ask, like, what is the thing that the L1 doing that? What becomes possible if the L1 does this versus doing it within a smart contract? I tend to think that everything that people can come up with that the L1 could provide, i.e. very fast cross-shard execution, can happen if you just have an agreement amongst different shards or rollups to live within the same contract, the same bridge contract on mainnet, and enforce rules upon all the people in that ecosystem. I think you can sort of see this with the superchain ecosystem developing. We're supposedly going to see very fast cross superchain transactions or operations, just the previous block. And the way that you can do that in an optimistic environment that you can't normally do is that they're sort of all agreeing to move forward and move backwards together. And so I think that you can do this without enshrining those types of execution environments on the L1.
I think what would excite me more rather than sharding or roll-ups is multi-party proposers. To have multiple parties proposing a block. And we could grow it potentially larger. I mean, if we look at some of the innovation that's coming out of these parallel chains, I think they're exposing some of the natural patterns that we already have kind of liquid sharding, shards that are self-organizing already. You have a lot of transactions that care about what's going on with Uniswap. You have a lot of transactions that care a lot about what's going on with betting markets. And you have a lot of transactions that are completely uncollected. So right there you could have 3 different proposers provide 3 non-conflicting sets of state changes, and we could combine those and build it in a multi-party system. So rather than forcing ourselves into hard sharding lanes, I think what will be more exciting is to look and see how these organic shards start forming and how we can facilitate them to be built and grown through multiple proposers and builders.
Yeah, you kind of mentioned this at the beginning, and I was curious to dig more into it. What types of things would you like to see happen on L1? Do you think that these things must happen on L1? How can we facilitate a better separation of those totally different sets of transacting?
So when it comes to storage slots, we need to have better ways to deal with collisions within the slots. Right now, when you look at the way you do your ERC20s and you send someone $20, you don't say plus 20 and minus 20. You say 10 to 30 and 30 to 10 on 2 different chains. So if there was a way within your transaction to express that as plus 20 or minus 20, then you could have multiple of those collected across 3 different multiple builders. And then when you combine them together, you can figure out, does this violate, do I have enough money in there? Do I have $80 to do $60 worth of transactions? And then it doesn't care which one of the 3 shards come in and what the final order that comes in. And it doesn't matter who gets 20, 40, and 60 in their reads. All that matters is they have the 20 there. So whatever we can do to reduce these collisions and these contentions among the resources increases the ability to have this nirvana world of every person who runs a proposer who runs a node could have one tiny proposal, and each node comes in, gets combined, and it works or it doesn't. And that's kind of where the fuzzy math comes in, is it works or it doesn't. But I think that's kind of the future I want to see towards is not where there's one shared proposer every round. It's where everybody proposes, and there's one person whose task is to bring these proposals together without executing. So it's kind of a half step towards where we're at right now, where one person executes all the transactions. The transactions have been executed, and they just combine the results and make sure they're all compatible.
Did you have something to add?
Yeah, to back up about the heterogeneity thing, one of my concerns about L1 and just sort of as it ossifies, if we push everything to L2, is just that it'll start to fragment. I think the diversity of L2s is great, but we're already seeing there's different, some of these L2s they compile down to different opcodes, and it becomes harder and harder to reason about what the EVM is. And I think as they diversify, one of the great things about Ethereum is how standard the EVM is. But if it starts to just get implemented with all kinds of different features everywhere, it becomes really hard to build for all of that. You kind of have to target one of them or another. And I think we'll lose a lot of the unity that we as an ecosystem have. So I think that might be a coordination, but I think RIPS is part of this, but it does seem like there's an incentive for all these L2s to sort of just drive separately from the pack and differentiate themselves. And I think that does run a risk. And so I think if we fragment too much, to your question earlier, that would be kind of a failure case if we have to look too far down the road.
Right. This being said, the fragmentation. Like if you think, for example, of having multiple OSs, right? You run something on Linux, it doesn't work on Mac right off the box. Now that's where proving execution really rocks, because you don't need to really call the library. For example, you just need to know that someone called the library for you, did what they were supposed to, and you know it's correct, right? You don't need to speak the same language, which is amazing when you think about it. You just need to know that at least, yeah, they did what they were supposed to do, and the result that you're being given is correct. I think there's a lot to explore in that. I mean, that doesn't invalidate what you're saying clearly, but I think like this pattern is going to prove very powerful, and hopefully, like the problem disappears entirely. I can't be sure right now, but it would be pretty amazing.
I agree, and I would say that we should work on better tooling and be able to easier modify the, for example, Solidity compiler without actually forking the CLS and like doing some modifications. Be able to add your own opcodes, be able to add your own optimization or whatever for your rollup use case. And then, as was said, you are able to prove it on L1 without even knowing that you have some differences. So I think I actually saw rollups as a way to innovate, and people started to stick to EVM on L1, the implementation. That makes sense today, and I hope it will not be the case in the future.
This audit is something that we do in RET, basically. RET SDK allows you to extend the main client with your like extensions, be that new. You can even like change execution if you need. But that kind of feature can be very like composable. You can add your changes and still depend on the core implementation that follows the mainnet, and basically it allows you to stay on the topic of the newer changes getting implemented on the Ethereum. I think it's inevitable for the L2s to innovate, to add their own things. If you have just copies from like the same thing, it will die out. It doesn't make sense. I think evolution and improvements are going to happen whether we like it or not. We just need, for us, is to enable that transition and for them to make it easier to do those stuff.
You guys want to talk about the beam chain real quick? I've been looking at this question for the last 45 minutes. Who wants to take the first stab at how does the beam proposal play into these ideal futures? Is beam the right way forward?
Full disclosure, I am currently helping some beam chain project to see like the feasibility of it. It's an interesting idea, which is actually the worst thing you can say about something. It's no. I like the idea that we have a governance problem with Ethereum. It's not a problem, but maybe like erasing everything and starting over from learning. I used to have a mentor in programming that used to say every good piece of code has been rewritten 3 times. I think at least the intent is pretty good. I think also the spec is still developing. We don't quite know what's going to land in there, but I think the effort has merit, and I also know that it will not be like it looks very ambitious, but so did ETH 2.0, right? We were supposed to have shards, we were supposed to have multiple execution engines. We got none of that, at least so far. We will get a much more palatable maybe, but also a much simpler version of beam chain. So I think it's a worthy effort. I don't know what will come out of it, but basically currently it's me wasting my time. So yeah, I think it's worth trying.
Can you give a TLDR? What is beam chain today? What's the proposal?
Right. So the beam chain, today the beam chain is absolutely nothing. It's just an idea. But hopefully with
an interesting idea.
An interesting idea. In the next 6 months, hopefully it will be a complete spec, or at least a good enough spec. And it's about doing the merge again. Yeah, I'm selling it. Really, I might not. It's the idea is to say, well, we did this amazing thing with the merge. We we ripped the consensus engine out of Ethereum and we replaced it with a new one. And we had a lot of ideas, and some of them were really good, and some of them were not so good. Some of them were, mistakes in retrospect, like for example using BLS, because BLS is not quantum secure. We thought we had a lot more time to do this. Maybe we don't. We want to redesign everything that in a way that has inclusion list, like basically censorship resistance. We want to build with quantum security. We want to change like we did, for example, this finality that comes, much later than the confirmation happens, or at least that is way behind the head of the chain. Turns out we don't really need all that. So it's a fresh start. So it's okay. Think of it. It's a bit like it's a very bold statement, but think of it as we're going to get rid of the beacon chain and we're going to replace it with something that that has the benefits of everything we learned on the beam chain, the beacon chain.
Would you say the merge was a research project?
As far as I'm concerned, it was, because it was very much a researcher project in the sense that they had this big to-do list, and then Mikhail Kalinin and Danny Ryan and I we came together and said, how do we make this happen? Like we had to change. Sorry?
Push to production.
It was a push to production, exactly. Exactly. It was a very ambitious research project, and we pushed it to production. No, it was a good thing because like I keep saying, done is better than perfect. But when perfect becomes a reality as well, we should look into it and try to make it happen. And of course, it's never perfect, but I think we should keep improving.
So this is going to scare some people, but do you think the beam chain is going to be the final form, or will there be another revision?
Of course there will be another revision, yes.
Based on my experience at Google, I mean, that's how they kept everything top level, is they'd have someone write it, it'd be awesome, and they'd hire new people, they would maintain it, and when you maintain it, the only way you maintain it is your best maintaining code you've written, so they would rewrite it. So whole portions of Google are rewritten on average every 2 to 3 years, just because that's how long people tend to stay in their jobs. And the upside is when it's rewritten every 2 to 3 years, you know exactly how to fix it when things go bad and exactly what's wrong and exactly what to inform the next level. The downside is there's like this MAME where it's like one road is like shut down and closed, deprecated, and the other one's under construction and it says not ready yet. And like these are your two choices when you build something at Google for what you get to use. And I hope we don't hit that sort of a future in Ethereum.
Yeah, at least currently, I mean, okay, I don't want to ask people when they intend to retire, but I see myself staying longer in this position than just 2 years. So that's at least I'm projecting on other people, but I think we have a lot more stability in this respect. But yeah, it can become hell, absolutely. At the same time, yeah, we still need to find a way to evolve, and the problem is, we've been pushing, it's really a governance, like trying to address a decentralized governance problem, instead of, making little changes that are going to take forever, because, and mind you, this is not an excuse for not being able to be better at delivering incremental changes, but the reality is Ethereum has become more and more conservative in a way, and maybe not in spirit, but de facto, and we need to be able to do a big leap again. We haven't been doing this since, okay, I would contend we haven't done that since the merge. Some people would say the blobs. I guess it's also a big change, but yeah, like it's really it's a social thing, and I think the beam chain has this the merit of at least trying to deliver a big change again.
I think we didn't have still like the clear answer, and I get it, that it's fine. What is beam chain today? There is a question about ZK proof verification sidecar in the future in the beam chain. I think that's like a big part of the plan of the Beam chain, right? To have some sort of ZK state transition function that you can verify, and it has a dependency on the EL to also have a ZK VM. So this is like the big part of it, and we can say that the Beam chain is about ZK, for example. What you said also seemed to be like a Beam chain about signal slow finality or faster finality, right?
Yeah, much faster. Yeah, so when I said we're probably not going to get the entire product right now, this is exactly what I was thinking. Like ZK has so much innovation right now that I think it's too early to jump. So that's why when I saw the presentation, I'm like, yeah, this is coming later, and there might, like Dano said, there will be there will be another chain that will do this. But it's possible. It would be, yeah. And when you talk about the faster finality, yeah, it would actually be nice to have, because this is a great usability change, and I think we're getting this one. Like, there's been a lot of work done on this by Francesco, for example, from the research team at the EF. This one seems way more realistic to me than, and I can be wrong, right? I'm just exploring right now.
And there is, I think, a bit related question about unstoppable transactions, and it's about censorship resistance, I think. And that the Beam chain, as far as I know, does not have a proposal for like censorship resistance, and we can do it actually faster. We have Fossil, for example, that can be shipped before Beam chain, so not in 5 years, hopefully.
Right, so that's a very good point. The risk with the Beam chain is that, yeah, people will say, okay, this is too complex, so we're gonna ship it with the Beam chain. And of course, the Beam chain, I mean, just like ETH 2.0, this is exactly what happened with ETH 2.0 and why we needed to make it happen. People were, yeah, okay, but you know, like, we have proof of work is working, we have so many problems to solve. This will happen after ETH 2.0, and in some respects it did, but it also became an excuse, and that's why I think my role, and I think it should not just be my role, it's going to be a lot of people, hopefully in the community. Everybody should look at the Beam chain and say, okay, this is nice, but we need to ship, basically. And yeah, shipping Fossil before the Beam chain would be awesome. just be aware, it's going to happen. People are going to say, too complex, let's do it during the Beam chain. We have to fight that.
Yeah, I think that's probably my number one concern is there's sort of two classes of big projects in Ethereum. There's things that we sort of know how to do and that it's difficult to do given the legacy environment that we live in. And then there's things that we don't exactly know how to do, things that we have ideas to work towards, but we wouldn't say they're like production ready. We haven't seen them anywhere before. And I think that the Beam chain contains both of those topics. And the things that I worry about are the things that we like don't know how to do yet. And I think Fossil is close to something that we know how to do, but it's not really been implemented. And so it's still in this idea. And it's a very well fleshed out idea compared to some maybe other things like, I don't know, 4-second block times. But it's not like address space extension, where I think we have pretty good idea of how you make address space extension. You just extend the value, the number of bytes in the address by 12. It's just extremely difficult to do when the airplane is in the air. And I think I would like to see more things on the Beam chain, fixing the stuff that we just can't fix easily in the current chain. Post-quantum, I think, is probably a more compelling one. It's going to be very difficult to just swap all of the cryptography out of the current chain and replace it. But some of the things like Fossil is the main one that's coming to mind. It's like, okay, you know, you try to bundle all of this stuff together. We just don't. The reason it takes a long time to iteratively ship things is because it takes a long time to take something from, yeah, we kind of know how to do it, to this is safe to ship onto a multi-billion-dollar network. And I think that just bundling a bunch of that stuff together doesn't, like, we still have to do the work. You know, maybe we can create a strong shelling point for everyone, but we still have to do the work and make sure it's safe. We're not going to ship the Beam chain if we're not equally confident in it as we are to a regular hard fork on Ethereum.
Right, and just pressing the point, the first thing I said about the Beam chain, at the moment it's nothing, it's just an idea. Yeah, I totally agreed.
To move discussion more to execution.
Yeah.
Consensus layer on its own, it could have like a lot of improvements, muscle finality, like lower time between the blocks. But for the execution, I would like to list the things that are in execution that we can improve. One of them is transaction broadcasting, how we broadcast transaction. Second thing is execution as the EVM, how to improve for the users EVM in general. Third thing is the state proofs, basically Merkle tree, or something else. And those are basically and fourth one is the state. Basically we now have like accounts and storage. Should that involve something else? We're talking about the endgame now. I think the two paths that we need to basically, at least in my mind, that we should think about is basically UX on various fields and performance. Performance is basically how many transactions that we can execute. Those are the questions that execution layer needs to solve. UX is mostly, there are even two parts there. It's like the UX of the user that runs the node. I want to run it on my phone, for example, and I need to verify transaction on my phone. And UX, in different sense, how easy for me is to send transaction that does the things that I ask. For example, AIP 7702 is small change in basically in how impactful it is going to be. It's like massive. And I think the improvements in execution layer is mostly hey, what's the next transaction that are going to have the same or bigger impact than 7702? I don't know. I'm just like asking community.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree that we need to find these targeted changes that are going to have a broad impact. And I think that further something we should look at is figuring out how to stem the proliferation of precompiles, because, I mean, so we see the BLS 12381 precompiles are being introduced in the next hard fork, but we've been debating these for 5 years. 5 years? 5 years? Was it 2019? I don't remember. 7.
Yeah. Proposals from 2020.
Right. And at the end of the day, like, if you provide optimized modular arithmetic, you can, in Geth CVM, you can get within 2x the cost of the BLS precompiles in both performance and gas.
Wall clock time, right?
Sure, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, targeted improvements to the EVM. Oh, and something else. So, like, if we look at the explosion of complexity in on the cryptographic side of like all these new Stark schemes coming out, all these various flavors of algebraic hash functions, it's a nightmare to try and coalesce around new precompiles. And yeah, we need to find a way to allow users to implement contracts with close to precompile performance and cost.
I feel that the framing user-made precompiles is very powerful. In general, I think for the lattices, for something like that, we'll still need to have some kind of precompiles additionally to the EVMX. But in general, EVMX could unlock some things to the users. The question is how many new cryptographic primitives do we need inside the EVM? Not just should we just be fine with adding new precompilers that we need, or enabling users to make their own.
About a big unlock that's maybe not about L1 but about EVM. UEF allows you to have custom bytecode format. For example, you can have not EVM bytecode but some other bytecode like RISC-V or WASM. And that would be amazing if we ship UEF, because as we know today, L2s depends on L1 making a change. So we expect L2s also have UEF, and they can experiment with, for example, RISC-V. For example, there's a project by Leo R55 where you compile your Rust smart contract into RISC-V and you execute it lots of questions, how to do the gas metering, how to do it properly, but I think it can be a big unlock for new UX, for new developers to come and try play with Ethereum.
Was that a stab at answering the first question?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good start. I mean, it's not just Rust. I mean, we have Rust SENs here, which is
We love Rust.
Oh, really? But like the fact it's a more general architecture, although RISC-V is unfortunately from a user point of view a whole bunch of architectures that are somewhat related. But even if you look at like higher, maybe more like heavier programming languages like Go or I mean you could just cross-compile the Python interpreter and run.
Oh my god.
Yeah. I mean, it will happen. I know. Like just be prepared. It will happen.
Python smart contracts.
Python smart contracts. But yeah, like Ignacio and I, we love Zig, for example. It's also pretty good in this respect. Yeah, so that I'm looking forward to that. The other big unlock I want, I mean, it's not gonna be a surprise for anybody, but I want statelessness. There are so many things that will be possible just being able to exchange proofs among, like small proofs among many actors. This is something, I mean, I don't even know what's going to happen, but like this has the potential to be really game changing. It's going to be a whole new Ethereum. I had another thing I wanted.
That should be the tagline.
That should be the tagline.
Stateless, a whole new Ethereum.
And a whole new Ethereum, absolutely.
And can we get like the Aladdin theme song go with it?
Yeah.
Whole new Ethereum. Anyway, so I do think that the changes coming in Vertical for statelessness are essential for the isolation that we're going to need. But I think embedded in there is one tiny little thing that might be also unlocking optionality as we have account versioning. There's a version of an account. So other chains could do crazy things, like they could have account version number 100, which uses UTXOs instead of storage slots. And they could unlock things optionally and clearly signify that in their state. And if you don't understand it, well, go use the client that supports it. And that makes it clear in the state as you're executing it what's going on. And I think that's the key to optionality, is having places and hooks to say, I'm doing something different, and mainnet's going to see that I'm doing something different and refuse to execute this contract, refuse to do this thing, because that's not what mainnet does. That's what your favorite rollup does, and that's how they differentiate.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a cool aspect, and we're starting to actually see L1 use that special domain, and not quite in the way that you just described, but like with 7702, we're sort of reusing the EF byte. This is something that just wasn't possible before a simple EIP that said you cannot deploy code that starts with byte EF. So who knows what other types of interactions we're going to be able to build with that super simple primitive on the L1. Back to this question, I did have kind of a follow-up question, what people think about this as something that could be a change that could unlock a lot of other changes. One thing that we talk about on the execution layer a lot is we talk about legacy and we talk about backwards compatibility. And I'm curious, what would you need to see to say it might be okay to de-enshrine the current execution environment? Like today, we sort of have made a commitment to the EVM, to the ETH1 EVM, as people call it. Is this something that we should carry on forever, for the next 10 years, the next 50 years? Should we have that expectation that contracts on the L1 will always be coupled tightly with the consensus of the protocol? Or is it something that we might be able to delete, transpile to a new world, change the costs, change the frequency? How do you guys think about de-enshrining the current EVM?
I think if we can take a parallel from what happened with self-destruct, where when we tried to remove self-destruct, there were a number of contracts that were broken and a vocal user base that brought out the torches and pitchforks to understandably complain that their contracts were being broken and we were breaking our social contract.
Isn't it just casino?
What?
Isn't it just a casino contract?
casino. Yeah, but like still, like people were going to lose money as a result, and we had to. I mean, in the end, we ended up coming up with a compromise that worked. But I think that the transpilation of EVM to EOF seems like a much thornier thing, and I feel like to do it properly, we have to force it through and tell people that, look, if you don't upgrade in such amount of time, this will become deprecated and not work. And the fallout of that will be people getting mad.
I feel like there's a bit of a spectrum here, though. It's not necessarily saying that one day we just turn off the legacy EVM. Like, I think it's a design space that hasn't been explored a whole lot, but you could imagine, I mean, as an idea I thought of the other day, like what if the ETH1 legacy VM only docks with the consensus layer once an epoch? You know, we are able to transpile a lot of contracts to a new execution environment. There's not a lot of operations that are still happening in this legacy environment. Maybe we can push the new environment to be much more performant and say, you know, if you're still using this legacy world, the throughput of the transaction is going to be much, much less.
And then we rewrite the old stuff in Python and we run it into an emulation on this environment.
And then it ends up being the exact same amount of performance as we had before.
Exactly,
but
nothing breaks.
I think in general it will depend on when the analysis starts. If 99% of the contract can be transpiled to EOF, amazing. I'm not sure if that future is possible. Even if it's like 19%, it will be big like move from moving from legacy to the EOF. But that will depend when the analysis starts and when we see the numbers, when we see the possibilities, problems, everything around it.
So just FYI, I don't know if you're aware, when you must be aware, when we had this debate about Verkle vs EOF, I was like, if you can compile, because there's this big transition, right, in Verkle. If we can at the same time compile EOF, legacy into EOF, that would be amazing, and then I would say EOF has to go first. And they looked into it, didn't come up with something that was very satisfying. But if we can, like, I'm still saying that if we can make this happen, then we need to make it happen.
So because of some of the things that we're banning, we can't. We're getting rid of gas introspection, and we're getting rid of code introspection, and there are absolutely contracts that very much depend on that. Another thing we're trying to get rid of is polymorphic addresses that can change your code. We've mostly broken it. By the way, we've nerfed self-destruct, but we haven't completely broken it. I think a more realistic plan of what's going to happen going forward is we won't be able to ban and rewrite all old legacy opcodes. We'll be able to validate what's going on with the old contracts and the ones that behave well, like they always do a push before their jump. We can we can do sidecar analyses for those and have the ZK systems work fine for those. But the contracts that do the real nasty and ugly things, like jumping from call data values into a destination within their contract, we let them do it. We just charge them through the nose for it.
Does anyone do that?
Yes. Someone actually said, this needs to be preserved for EOF. And luckily we had the Jumpy operation, and the answer was, you don't compile your code and figure out where your addresses are. You just use simple numbers like 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that solved most of their problem.
It's not just like transitioning from the legacy to the EOF, it's transitioning the logic. And the problem is, as Dan said, is basically some functionality were removed by design, and we want them removed.
Yeah, I guess maybe at a bit of a higher level, we have a social contract to continue running, making sure that code is executing, and both the opcodes and the higher level heuristics, the way the system is designed. And I'm just curious, is that a contract that's breakable? Is that something that people up here, people in the audience, is it something that we feel like this is an important social contract of Ethereum, that the people who are deploying to the EVM today, we're going to make a promise, it's always going to work? Or is there a world where we say, you know what, we're going to sunset everything on ETH1 EVM in 10 years, so think about that, start migrating, but don't deploy a contract that's going to unlock in 100 years?
I feel that it depends on the cost. If you're breaking something that's worth millions, then it's not worth. If we're breaking like the troll contract that's made because to make our lives like harder, then that's fine. It will depend on the cost. And to figure out the cost, we need some kind of analysis to say, hey, if you do this, this kind of contract is going to like break, not work, and they will lose like millions. That's not something that we want to do.
But what if the troll is the third largest NFT exchange? I mean, one thing when it comes to breaking social contracts, we tried this when we talked about state expiry, and I think it drove Alexi crazy as he's trying to analyze it. So, I mean, if we're going to ask someone to do the design for breaking social contracts, we need to make sure that they're willing to be a pariah if necessary.
Speaking of social contract, yeah, like, you know, we had the DAO. Like the blockchain was always, you know, meant to be like touted as a immutable layer, and then Ethereum had the DAO, so we're especially, you know, under scrutiny for this because the DAO we made a fork to go and modify the state.
The exception that proves the rule, yeah.
Yeah, but sure. But now we need to make sure this is the rule, right? Because otherwise, I mean, yeah, like we're building. I mean, I hope we're all building for 50 years from now, 100 years from now. We don't know what the problems will be then, but I think there should be a guiding principle that we should not touch the state. And so, if something was working, the promise should still be that it needs to keep working, basically.
And I think some options for don't touch the state is maybe we could go with that original Serenity proposal and have a layer 1 roll-up that spins off and only posts blocks once an hour.
Wow. Yeah, maybe we should go in rapid fire and try to answer the question.
I was just thinking of doing that. First up, I think we have unstoppable blocks. I want to see unstoppable transactions. That also kind of plugs into the one below. It seems like people want to talk about privacy. Does anyone want to comment on how privacy interacts with the EVM?
Can the person expand? What does it mean? Unstoppable transactions?
So it's not necessarily censorship resistance, it's more about how you propagate transactions. The problem is at the moment you have an incentive to propagate headers, and it sort of makes sense, but nodes don't really have an incentive to propagate transactions, and the person building the block could decide to censor transactions. So, if you run even if you run your own node, you submit the transaction to your node. There's no real reason for that transaction to be propagated through the network.
I'm sorry, had to ask you something.
Yeah.
Do you mind saying it quickly?
Very quickly, how do you incentivize people to propagate transactions?
I think this is a super tricky problem. That's why we build the transaction pool in a way that it's relatively light to run, and we sort of enforce it for everyone to run by default. I think defaults are powerful, and moving into a world where we start letting people easily turn off the transaction pool is going to create an environment where it's going to be difficult to incentivize people to run it. I don't see any innate incentive to do this. It's kind of like providing a nice free facility to bounce your transaction around the world to eventually get it to a builder. So I think that as we change the behavior of the transaction pool, we need to be very cognizant that the people who are running these nodes, it's like an altruistic thing. Maybe a longer term future is like there are different designs of transaction pools, like maybe with the DHT type of network where we don't have to quite have the same number of people running it to have very quick propagation, and the people who care can listen widely, and the people who don't care can listen very shallowly. But it's not something that's been looked a lot into.
There's something called rainbow staking that people are looking into. We could add, the idea is to break the reward system into several aspects of doing the network. We could have, this is basically what inclusionists do, actually. You could force people, you could also reward people to include, pick transactions at random and say, if this one is there, then you get a reward. If it's not, then you don't.
No, it's beyond inclusion list because there's a chance that you've never seen the transaction. So if you're building
Right.
an inclusion list and it hasn't got to that validator who's building that list,
Fair.
it hasn't got that. So the topic of the discussion was, what do we want to see in 5-10 years' time? I want to see unstoppable transactions. I want to be able to submit a transaction to the network and it not get blocked from propagation, not get blocked from being built.
I think solution for that is to have blind transactions. Basically, you have blind transactions. Somebody's paying for the maximum gas. It doesn't matter who, and you basically expose that transaction when it is included inside the blockchain, and then you're basically having nobody knows what does that transaction do, and you can like trigger that execution afterwards.
Any closing comments from anyone up here or sitting down about in-game execution?
For me, for execution, is most like improving UX. What's the next transaction or transaction type, whatever it is, that's going to improve the usage of Ethereum. Under that is performance. That's the thing that we are already working on, gigagas. But in general, UX is the part that's not that explored, and I think it's a little bit lacking.
Great. Sorry, I think that we're at time now, but thanks a lot for joining us, everybody. Thanks a lot, you guys, for coming and having this conversation. Hopefully people will find this useful to think about what the end game could possibly look like rather than what the next 1 year looks like.